VMware vSphere with Tanzu Specialist 5V0-23.20 exam questions are helpful in the preparation. Share some VMware 5V0-23.20 exam questions here. 1. How does Kubernetes implement the vSphere storage policy in vSphere with Tanzu? A. Storage class. B. Paravirtual CSL. Circa static persistent volume. D. Persistent volume. 2. Which step in vSphere with Tanzu enablement using the vSphere distributed switch process is done prior to using the workload management enablement wizard? A. Deploy the load balancer. B. Choose the Kubernetes content library that should be used in the supervisor cluster. Circa define the primary workload network p-range. D. Define the management network interfaces for the supervisor cluster. 3. Which kubectl command is used to list AL pods in the current active namespace? A. Kubectl get nodes. B. Kubectl get pods. C. Kubectl get services. D. Kubectl list pods. 4. A vSphere administrator is required to provide a developer with read/write permissions on a vSphere namespace. A. It is a Kubernetes cluster deployed by developers using a YAML specification file. B. It aggregates hosts across vSphere clusters to form a Kubernetes cluster on vSphere. C. It enables vSphere high availability and distributed resource scheduler. D. It exposes a Kubernetes API for use by DevOps teams. 5. Which command will show the Tanzu Kubernetes cluster versions available in the vSphere content library? A. Kubek1 get RC services. B. Kubek1 get content library. C. Kubek1 get Tanzu Kubernetes releases. D. Kubek1 get Tanzu images. 6. How can a vSphere administrator replace the supervisor cluster API endpoint certificate? A. Use the Certificate Manager CLI utility to replace the Supervisor Cluster API Endpoint certificate. B. Use the vSphere client to replace the Workload Platform MTG certificate. C. Use the vSphere client to replace the NSX Load Balancer certificate. D. Use kubectl to replace the Supervisor Cluster API Endpoint certificate. 7. Which two considerations needs to be made when deciding on a virtual machine class type during the process of creating a Tanzu Kubernetes cluster? Choose 2. A. Whether the resources provided by the virtual machine class type should be reserved on the host. B. The configuration parameters which need to be edited in the cluster. C. The amount of CPU, memory, and storage the virtual machine should have. D. Connectivity between the Tanzu Kubernetes cluster and the subscribed content library. E. The storage classes which need to be made available to the cluster. 8. Why would an organization set up private image registries? A. Role-based access control can be assigned by integrating the image registry with user identity management. B. DevOps engineers are able to store virtual machine images in a central location. C. Open-source registry server projects enable organizations to modify them as necessary. D. Public image registries lack enterprise support. 9. Which open-source project extends the Docker registry source code to provide an enterprise-class registry server? A. Namespace. B. Manifest. Circa Harbor. D. GitHub. 10. To which network are HA proxy virtual server IP addresses issued when using the vSphere networking stack default configuration? A. vMotion. B. Overlay. Circa primary workload. D. Management.